science fiction. We make no guarantees, however, how long it will remain fiction. Fiction. Fiction.
All right. Well, a merry Mummy Monday to all of you cognonauts out there. My name is Ayla, and I'm going to be your host for tonight's discussion on the mummy's curse. But first, let me just introduce my two lovely co-hosts. I have Nick and Mike here. How are y'all doing tonight?
Good evening.
Good
Hello.
evening. Hello.
Pretty good.
So we were having a pretty funny discussion beforehand just about quarantine. We've been legitimately quarantining since March here in California. And I think I'm starting to feel the effects. How about you two?
I've been out of my mind since April.
Good to know. And Mike?
I lost my mind long ago, so I'm pretty good right now.
You're impervious to the effects of the pandemic. You got that taken care of a while ago. Good. Well, yeah, I'm also hanging in there. I'm feeling a little bit like other people aren't quarantining because they just seem a little too fresh for me. But that's another story for another day. Because today we're going to talk about mummies. So real quick, we all know
The
a
ultimate
mummy.
quarantine.
Dude, seriously though, I had there were a lot of parallels writing this, like thinking about sarcophaguses and like thinking about my house and starting to think like, oh, we can never leave.
Become our tomb.
It's become our tomb. Yeah, it's not really a laughing matter, but it's a Monday, so we're going to do our best to entertain. So anyway, just to go over the basics, a mummy, it's a dead body of a human being or an animal. Since we did our familiars talk, we remember mummified cats. And these were usually preserved by the ancient Egyptian process or a similar method of embalming. And sometimes this actually happened by natural methods. So like a dead body would be dried and preserved by nature, such as like in the desert, or it could be preserved in ice. And for the ancient Egyptian culture, the afterlife was a very important part of it. And one of the ways that they prepared for the afterlife was to try and preserve the body for as long as possible. And they did this through a process of embalming, and these embalmed bodies are what we call mummies today. So just to kick things off for the discussion, Nick and Mike, are you familiar with mummies, and what comes to mind for you when you think of mummies?
Yeah, well, definitely familiar with them. Comes to mind. I was a mummy once for Halloween. I think that was probably the easiest Halloween costume your parents could make for you. Just get a whole
Nice.
bunch of ace bandages and wrap them around yourself.
Adorable.
Yeah, I think that was. I mean, I remember. I'm trying to see if there was anything else that stood out about mummies for me. The movie with Brendan Fraser, I remember that.
I like that one.
And then obviously the the Egyptian folklore around them. Yeah, but that's about it.
Okay. And how about you, Mike?
Nick stole all of my reference
Damn.
points for mummies, so I have no more to add.
Okay, no problem. Well, I ask just to kind of get a sense of what comes to mind with mummies. I mean, I think for me, I definitely think curses when I think of mummies. There's not really a separation. The two just kind of go hand in hand. And I actually remembered that show or movie, Tales from the Dark Side, where they had the mummy figure like creeping through the house. Did you remember that?
Yeah, that was like a Disney Channel show, wasn't it?
Oh, no, that had to be darker. That was like it had that Tales from the Crypt guy in the beginning.
Oh no, I think then you're just thinking of Tales from the Crypt.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Okay.
You're right. Dark Side's much more PG. This one's a little bit darker.
No, I was
remember being
thinking of the
really
movie.
scared.
I was thinking of the movie Under Wraps in 1997. It was a made for TV movie, I believe, starring Adam Wiley, Mario Yedidia, Clara Bryant, and written by Don Reimer.
Well, well, well. You learn something new every day. Under Wraps. That's a cute name. Well, yeah, and I remember. So the Tales from the Tales from the Crypt. That's what I'm talking about, right? Tales from the Crypt.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm getting them confused. But they talk about this mummy coming to like a museum, and then it starts acting crazy. And I remember I went on a field trip to the Natural History Museum. Have either of you seen a mummy?
I think I've seen one on a school trip too. Maybe that was it, but it seems like that might be a false memory.
Yeah, I don't think they have actual mummies on display. They have the sarcophagus.
Oh, they
I
have
remember-
mummies.
Oh, okay.
Well, at the Natural History Museum in the 90s, they had a mummy on display. And it was wrapped up so you couldn't see like human bits, but it was definitely an exposed mummy. And I remember that was one of my first memories of like, oh, mummies equal curses. I need to just like hide out for the next couple of days. So I think it's kind of funny because I started wondering, well, where do these stories come from? So when thinking about mummies, we usually think of Egypt. Do you have any idea about where they might have gotten the inspiration for mummies? Like, because you think about it, it's
well, it was, I don't know, but I thought it was the understanding that you're basically trying to preserve the body for the afterlife, right?
pretty much, yeah. Like you want to, you want to preserve it that way. You also want to keep riches with you because they believe that you could take your physical belongings into the next world, which is kind of interesting because you think about like what remains today and how few mummies we actually find. So it's kind of interesting to me because I think like, well, that's got to be a lot of people that went to the next world with absolutely nothing. What would that look like?
They just can't make it across. They can't buy. They can't sell anything at the market afterwards.
Maybe. I'm not really sure. But so, I did a little research on it and it did just kind of back this up. Was like the traditional view was that it began with the preservation of Old Kingdom royals in the 2600 BCE era and developed from the observation of bodies that had been naturally preserved in hot desert sands. And new evidence actually shows that artificial mummification had its origins much earlier. Recent excavations of working class burials in Upper Egypt, dating back to about 35,000 BCE, show a real variety of complex burial practices that existed at the time, including the ritual extraction of internal organs and wrapping of specific parts of the body. So I thought that was kind of a cool fact because I always thought it was just the kings and pharaohs that got wrapped up. But studies are showing that there's actually a very complex, different set of rituals depending on who you were back then. So the next question I was going to ask was just, let's see here. So mummies in nature and wondering if Egyptians observed something in the natural world or if they maybe inherited this mummification from ancestors. And one of the things that was really interesting to me when I was reading up on this stuff was that the lineage of ancient Egyptians is actually still up for debate. Did you guys know this?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Mike?
No.
Yeah, I was totally clueless. I thought, that we had a kind of understanding of the order of things and what fed into the Egyptian empire. But apparently it's really difficult to determine their ancestry because obtaining DNA from mummified bodies was really tough. Like you don't ever really know if it's been contaminated or how well preserved it was. But some of the latest theories suggest from like fancy genome mapping that there is an increase in sub-Saharan African ancestry in post-Roman periods. And I'm just quoting a nature.com article. But it also says that modern Egyptians and ancient Egyptians are really different. And so right now, some of the mummies that they studied they kind of, let's see here, it says scientists say that ancient Egyptians were more closely related to Europeans than they are to modern day Egyptians. And then there's a quote that I pulled out that said, foreign conquest didn't influence the genetic makeup of ancient Egyptians. The mummies collected span a time when Greeks and Romans would have ruled, but the samples don't show any of this influence. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But then another scientist says if we could find mummies that were another 10,000 years older, we might find something completely different. So just because this is a little bit of a fantastical show, and I know that there's a lot of documentaries about like Egyptians and aliens and things like that. Like, what do you two make of that? That we don't really know where what we don't know all the whole history there.
Well, there's good speculation from a lot of, learned individuals and people who specialize in these fields that the Egyptian society that we know of it, as far as the builders of the Giza pyramids, there's suggestion that perhaps they inherited that area, and that's only really indicated by the speculation that the Sphinx is actually a lot older than most of the rest of ancient Egypt, and that perhaps whoever the Egyptians were back then kind of came to this place where the Sphinx was created by a prior civilization.
Oh, and that's super interesting. And yeah, I did a little bit of a deeper dive, and I know it will be a total tangent because we want to hear some mummy stories. But if you're interested in learning more about prehistoric Egypt, then it's definitely worth your time. And I'm going to do this myself to look a little further back. So, example. The Egyptians' reign actually lasted for almost 30 centuries. And I would probably fact check that because that seems insanely long. 30 centuries.
3,000 years.
That's like, does that sound right to you? That's so long.
They've already dated conservatively, they dated ancient Egypt to about 6,000 BC. That's 8,000 years ago.
Well, and then here it says from its unification around 3100 BC to its conquest by Alexander the Great in 332 BC. Yeah, 30 centuries. And what, like America's been around, what, 3, 1, 2? What's the math on this right now? Where are we at?
A couple hundred years. Well, don't worry, we'll last a few thousand. It would take some work.
3,000. I mean... Yeah, you have to give respect. That is a long time to kind of be a cohesive society. I don't know all the particulars, but it's pretty cool. Speaking of cool, I pulled some mummy facts, but before I get off of prehistoric Egypt, pre-dynastic periods, because there's the Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic cultural eras. So these are all a bunch of different ancient societies that kind of influenced Egypt. Maybe, we don't know. But did either of you have anything to add about just kind of that reflection?
Yeah, well, it would make sense that Egypt had a stabilized sort of society being positioned, right along the Nile and the Mediterranean, which is a crossroads of trade and exploration and commerce, sort of like the Tigris and Euphrates in Iraq, where the cradle of civilization was. Like these positioning yourself on a major, waterways always helps lengthen the longevity of your society, I think, unless the ocean eats it.
Unless that.
And then just their military strength as well. Weren't they pretty strong, which added to their longevity?
I don't know much about Egyptian military.
I honestly couldn't tell you aside from, Cleopatra.
I feel like they used a lot of chariots.
It's possible. I mean, Thebes was like a capital city in Egypt, so it's possible because I think of they were kind of positions like Greece was, where they were like these little nation states, So Thebes might have had like a pretty formidable military or something like that.
That's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Well,
Makes sense.
mm-hmm. Well, so speaking of cool, we've got some mummy facts. These are just kind of throwaway stories that I came across while getting to the juicier ones. But so the first one is, did you know that mummies had tattoos? Or rather, the people of Egypt had tattoos?
Yeah. Oh, I knew they had some. I don't know the full extent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, they found one, and it on the skin there was a lot of different symbols like written on the skin. And I remember they said that the archaeologist started crying when he actually saw it because it was the first time they were able to confirm it, which is kind of cool. And as a fun other fact, in California, tattoo shops are now allowed to be operational. So I just wanted to give them a little shout out. Get a tattoo. The Egyptians did it, and it's amazing. So the next mummy fact was, well, do you want me to talk about how they did the mummy things? I have a really quick summary of how mummification happens. Anyone need a refresher?
Yeah, let's do it. Dive
Let's
in.
do it. Okay. So the Egyptians would start out by covering the body with a salty crystal substance called natron. The natron would help to dry out the body, and they would also take out some of the organs. With the body covered and stuffed with natron, they would let the body dry out for around 40 days. Once it was dry, they would use lotions on the skin to preserve it, reinforce the empty body with packing, and then cover the body in wraps of linen. They would use many layers of strips of linen wrapping covering the entire body. Resin was used to glue the layers of wrap together, and the total process could take up to 40 days. It's a long time.
It's super strange and kind of weird if you think about these practices, because they were likely not the first time we were doing this type of stuff, and so it makes you wonder, what the heck were early humans doing removing organs from people after they died?
This is what I'm talking about. I was like really fascinated to see like who the people were before the ancient Egyptians, thinking like, well, there has to be some lore there. But I mean, you could just keep like there were so many. It's really hard to pin down one specific one. So I didn't have time to get into all of that. But I think you're totally right. Like there had to have been a progression, or like aliens landed and said, "Oh, yo, this is how you do it." Because it just
I'm
can't
just trying
be.
to think of like some naturalistic reason as to why early humans would feel compelled to dig out somebody's spleen or their heart, or like even
Curiosity,
because maybe curiosity, but I don't know. It would
Okay,
seem
what's
to me
inside
that
of there?
that the disgust level over a dead body and the possibility of being killed by the bacteria would deter most early humans away from digging in corpses. I mean, that's the reason that our biological, material smells, differently to different people. Like, reason your farts don't bother you and other people's farts do is because you recognize that that's foreign bacteria that could harm you.
That's a hilarious example, but I'm with you.
So it's just interesting to me as to why, like, because it would seem to me that they would be early humans would be very averse from messing with dead bodies.
Maybe that comes with like a civilization's mature, and as the species matures, we develop these things to stay away from these sort of harmful bacterias until we realize somewhere that like, yeah, no, this is what's harming us and we need to not do it.
So you think we're eating organs?
I don't. Maybe. I mean, at least we were curious enough to dig for them.
Huh. I think they didn't they put the organs in jars though?
I'm not sure what they did with
With the Egyptians or humans?
Egyptians. I mean,
Um,
Hannibal probably ate them, but
Yeah, I think they put them in jar. I'm sure they preserved them. I wonder how much mummification has influenced our mortician work now.
I mean, I think
Like
it's
how
all
we-
that same.
yeah, you drain the body of like blood,
Yeah.
and in their case, they just dry it out.
are we still we're lobotomizing people, putting brains in jars?
Well, then maybe if you donate your organs to science, then they'll probably take that brain out of you pretty quick.
That's
Wow.
true.
Well, you
Otherwise,
can donate a brain, but
yes, you
can
can.
you? No, you can't. No, you can't. You can't give somebody a
If
brain
you're an
transplant.
organ donor, you don't get to choose what you donate.
Well, yeah, I guess it could go to
And
science.
if
You're right.
somebody wants to just sell a brain to a university, I'm sure you can make pretty good money.
Look, grave robbing is a complete legit profession. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh man. Oh man. Well, we're gonna get to the grave robbing aspect. I have a couple more facts for you. So here's one cool tidbit that I didn't know. King Tut's dagger blade. So when he was buried, there was a dagger. It was either found on him or really close to him, but it was made of meteorite, which like from a meteor. Now, the thing about meteorite is that it requires a really, really sophisticated level of metallurgy in order to wield it. And his was not only shaped, but turned into an actual dagger. And that, when you take advanced metallurgy with advanced temple building, we still don't really know how the pyramids were built. I just think it's a little bit fascinating that here you have this really long-lasting civilization that was ages ago, and then they're showing these really advanced, I don't know, not machine work, but they're showing advanced capability.
Craftsmanship. Yeah, there's a parallel with the Mayans knowing obsidian craftsmanship, being able to make these really great ceremonial knives as well, and obsidian craft or like obsidian chipping, doing any sort of obsidian work is lost now. No one knows how to do it.
It's the same thing with
Wow.
Egyptian vase work, I think, too, because I think they were able to turn stone into vases that were thin enough that light could shine through them.
What? That's
Aliens.
wild. Well, yeah, and to that, I wonder, does this exhibition of advanced knowledge mean that we should re-examine their views on the afterlife? Because I mean, we're not really mummifying people today. Should we think about it? Do we think they knew something that we don't know?
I mean, but Mike kind of just said that we are I mean, like if you're being put in casket, you're being mummified.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
That was the
mausoleums.
original practice. They were the people who did it first. Your coffin's your sarcophagus, and you're embalmed. Yeah.
And if
Well, and yeah.
you're the more noble class, you have like one of those nice fancy
The
mausoleums
Mhm.
for your body, which is like a pyramid.
Well, and I think that's really interesting. And I was going to bring this point up towards the end of our chat, and we can revisit it. But it's the idea of burial practices and, wanting your body to merge with the natural material of the earth and wanting to keep it separate.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wondered about that because different practices, I mean, it seems to me that is a key distinction. And I don't know, like in your heart of hearts or in your gut, do you think that we should reabsorb? Or do you think that maybe mummification is a means to break whatever reincarnation cycle we might have or something else?
Well, it seems like we only have two ways of disposing of bodies: mummification and cremation. One of them is about integrating yourself basically atomizing yourself back into the earth. And then the other one is about preserving your body corporally, at least for some period of time. Obviously, it'll all end up being taken by the earth anyways. But I don't know, because you think about like the Vikings who had, they burn effigy, and like the
India, they
matter
do that
basically
too.
just goes right back to the earth. And then
Yeah.
then you have like Chinese who do mummies. So
Mhm.
like seems like there's really only two ways we dispose of bodies.
There, more modernly though, there is a lot of pro-death and green death movements. So like one of the big things I'm interested in is when I die, having my body turned into a thing that you could drop in the ocean and have coral reefs grow on it to try to
Mhm.
bring back some of those reefs.
Mhm.
That's
And
cool.
and there's technological ways now to try to help the environment when you give all your carbon back. But I do think for the more agnostic and non-religious, we should take a look at our burial rights or your own burial rights and figure out what you want to do, because you can give back to the environment through dying.
Yeah. Yeah. I always thought it'd be fun to be a tree. I always like originally I was like cremation, it's easy, it's cheap. And then I was like, well, no, if I have a grieving loved one, I want to be a tree and then they can come visit me.
I
That'll be
mean,
great.
you are being cremated. It's just that they put you in a pod with soil that has a seed in it as well.
Yes, yes. Yeah, exactly. But
So it's
you're
still only
absorbed.
cremation and
Okay. I guess
There,
mummification.
it's a
there's
difference
also
between planting me somewhere and scattering me to the wind on a
Yeah.
mountain somewhere. And that's where I'm like, I don't know. If people care about me, I'll be planted. But otherwise, just scatter me. I think, though, this episode's making me wonder if I need to be embalmed, which is really glib, but this is where we are. Well, okay. Did you want to add anything to that? I should
Oh,
move it along here.
I was just gonna make a joke. You could also turn yourself into a diamond and then give yourself to somebody so that they can sell you on eBay and pay some bills or something.
Ooh.
There's also that pattern.
Sell me on eBay. Okay, actually, this leads me to a joke. I had a little joke that I was supposed to start out with, but I forgot. It goes: a zombie, a ghost, and a mummy bought a house. It has all the usual rooms except for one. What room won't you find?
What?
A bathroom.
Nope, a living room.
Oh,
Hey, ha, 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 ha. That's it for tonight.
Good night, everybody. And you'll see like all the viewership drops off 20 some minutes in. Okay, moving on. So just a few more mummy facts. So over the years, one of the really creepy things is you're talking about death, is there's people from all walks of life that want to do really weird stuff to mummies. So they've been destroyed in a lot of ways. Some people burn the mummies for fuel. That's that carbon. Maybe, I don't know. Why would you burn a mummy for like? I'm trying to think, like, what are you burning a mummy and putting it into your car? Like, how is a mummy used for fuel? Anybody, either of you know?
well, there's not a lot of trees in the desert, so perhaps burning a body was a sustained heat source for a little while.
Okay, so it's a fuel for a fire. I could see that. They also took mummies and ground them into powders to make magical potions, and some were destroyed by treasure hunters. So, like, really interesting to me because I'm very like skidgy wampus about death, and it's just interesting to me. Like, would you ever take a magical potion that you
Sure.
knew had mummy in it?
Yeah. If I had like my ancestors or something like that, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, as a part of a spiritual ritual, I guess. Yeah. I mean, I don't see the biological harm in it, and on the belief side, it could be interesting. It could be an interesting experience, even if it's all made up in my head.
Okay. You, Nick? Mummy
Uh,
pills?
I mean, I don't know. When were we doing this? In like the 1910s and
Probably.
20s?
I don't know. I don't know.
Snake oil salesmen were still around, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Creepy.
Still are.
They still are, yes. So anyway, last few mummy facts. They did leave the heart in the body. The heart was considered to be the center of intelligence, and the brain was thrown away because it was thought to be useless. I thought that was kind of interesting. Also, sometimes the mummy's mouth would be open to symbolize breathing in the afterlife. And that might be one of the customs that led to the superstition that mummies can come back to life. And then a lot of what we know about mummies today is done without unwrapping them, but by using like CAT scans and MRIs. So that's just a little background about mummies. Now I'm going to get into some of the juicier stuff, but to Mike's point about taking mummy pills, you took the poison. So I'm going to read this title
Uh-oh.
for you. Yeah. I was going to bring it up later, but let's get there. So part of the aversion to having a mummy pill, I would think, is concerns about ingesting a human and having something horrible happen. That could be a curse. That could just also be this feeling like we shouldn't ingest humans. It's a little anti-cannibalist feeling. And so I thought that was kind of
indigestion. I mean, geez.
there's that. Yep.
But this is ground up post mummy. Is it really still cannibalism? Maybe.
Okay, so well, before today, I got a notification from CNN Travel. It said that a tourist returns a stolen artifact to Pompeii after suffering a curse. As a Canadian woman, she had 5 artifacts that she took from Pompeii in 2005, and she said that they plagued her with bad luck. It was a piece of a vase and then a piece of a ceramic wall. And she said, I wanted to have a piece of history that couldn't be bought. And she said that at the time she was young and dumb. Since returning to Canada, she had suffered 2 bouts of breast cancer, resulting in a double mastectomy, and her family had also been in financial trouble. Now, this isn't something that I would sneeze twice at. That's a weird term of phrase, but you know what I mean. I wouldn't really consider this much of a factual like evidence for curses, but according to CNN, their tourism interviewees and sources said that there were actually a lot of people who were returning to Pompeii to return stolen items. I guess the idea is that they took a piece of history that was captured during such a negative time that there was a bad energy associated with it. So I just want to leave it there. The article just came out today. It was in CNN, and again, it's called "Tourist Returns Stolen Artifacts to Pompeii After Suffering Curse." So Nick and Mike, what do you think about that? I mean, in terms of the sense that like we have this feeling of grave robbing, bad, dead people, ghosts and curses and things like that. Any kind of just like larger, big picture thoughts about that?
I think there are proper ways to, I guess, handle the dead, and improper ways. Obviously, grave robbing and treasure hunting, kind of like this for-profit kind of thing, is bad. But I think that's the overarching thing, like sort of like don't take what isn't yours from the dead. And then Pompeii, I forgot how fast the people actually died, but it makes sense why there would be all that energy there because the events happened so quickly.
Yeah. And I think, like somebody was saying, you can kind of get that vibe at the 9/11 site. And I remember I was there that maybe like 6 months after it happened. And you do get a palpable vibe when you're nearby. And again, the tourism folks said that over 100 visitors had returned small artifacts, citing that they were just sources of bad luck for them, which I thought was really interesting. You can't really pay people to give you back stuff that they stole. So yeah, I don't know. Nick, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of instinctually my mind goes to like abandoned insane asylums. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like these buildings are so inundated with negative energy, if that's what we can call it, for lack of a better term, that nobody even wants to return to them or step foot in them. Now, some people do, and they're trying to fetishize that sort of thing. But I would think that there would be something similar to that within the sort of treatment of we have when there's a traumatic event in a particular location. It holds that trauma, perhaps. But it would be interesting to me, and maybe we'll get to that point later on. But it would seem to me that perhaps the pyramids also were able to encapsulate energy as well. So maybe, and I know most of the mummies aren't found in pyramids, but I know that there are some that are pretty high profile that were. And perhaps pyramids were kind of like an energetic time capsule. And when you disturb that, it has repercussions.
Yeah, well, definitely. And you know what? It's interesting because the ancient Egyptians, a lot of them caught wise to the existence of grave robbers. So one of the origins of mummy and curses is that some noblemen had on their tombs curses inscribed. So if you open this, something terrible will happen. And they'll give you details about what will happen. Um, and I think that's interesting because, you know, if there was a couple of tombs that were buried under pyramids, well, that just seems like a lightning rod, like, hey, I'm buried here, come steal my treasures. Why would they do that? So, yeah, I don't, I mean, yeah, the purpose of the pyramids still, that's also still unknown. Do we know why they built pyramids?
Well, we know the official story, which are supposed to be tombs for pharaohs, but nobody really buys that anymore.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, because you don't have too many tombs there, and a lot of them are found off-site. And like I just said before, like it just seems counterintuitive if you want to protect your treasures for the next, you know, crossing over or whatnot. You wouldn't
Uh,
put like a big beacon on top of it. At least
well,
that.
yeah. Well, and I think we'll probably get into an ancient Egypt episode at some point, but I think it was interesting what you said prior, just a little bit ago, about how they didn't value intellect and the brain; they valued the heart.
Mm,
And so perhaps this concept of how like we're perplexed how the pyramids of Giza are so accurately parallel to the Orion's belt. They're so accurate to the true north and the true south of the Earth. Like they are very, very meticulously, almost like too perfect for us.
mhm.
And perhaps there's something to that their civilization wasn't actually using intellect to create these things, but was using some sort of internal heart instinct.
Yeah. I mean, think about it interestingly because they didn't just like say the brain wasn't anything. They literally said the brain is trash.
Hmm.
Which is interesting because the brain is where you synthesize all of your senses. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you would tap into heart source energy or um, wield the positioning of the stars and like I don't know. It's just kind of it's too sophisticated. There's too many questions and I don't know. It's just fascinating. I think we should definitely do an Egypt episode. And so, without further ado, let us get into the most famous curse, which is King Tut's curse. This, according to National Geographic, does get the top credit for popularizing the Pharaoh's curse. But the myth's origin has actually been traced to a London stage act that was performed 100 years before the boy king's tomb was excavated, and that was in 1922. But we'll just explore this for a little bit and see what we think. So it was 1922, and the discovery of King Tut's tomb in the Valley of the Kings near Luxor, Egypt, was a really big deal. Howard Carter was one of the folks to first open and expose not only the tomb, but its treasures that were at that point hidden for 3,000 years. And with that, he unleashed a global passion for ancient Egypt. Now, Tut's glittering treasures did make a lot of headlines, but so did sensationalist accounts of subsequent deaths following the expedition. So the major sponsor was a Lord Carnarvon, and, full disclosure, this is sourced from a tabloid, the UK Sun, but they did an interesting job just cataloging some of the deaths that followed from the opening of the tomb. So that happened in November 29, 1922. And the first death is probably the most interesting to me. That was Lord Carnarvon himself. He was actually there when the tomb came out of the earth, and he was a financial backer for the excavation, but he died from an infected mosquito bite. Now, what makes that particular death really interesting is that one, King Tut himself, after they did some scans on him, they discovered there was like an infection on his face. The second thing was that on the tomb itself, the inscription mentions a curse, and it said something about death coming to you on wings, or like winged death coming to you if you open it. So let's stop just at that first death. Is that enough to give you the heebie-jeebies, or should I go on?
Let's keep going.
Okay, so the next death was George J. Gould, and he was a tomb visitor, and he died from a fever shortly following his visit. Prince Ali Kamal Fahmy Bey died. He was an Egyptian prince, and he was shot and killed by his wife. Colonel Honorable Aubrey Herbert was the half-brother of Lord Carnarvon, and he died from blood poisoning related to dental work. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, he was the radiologist who x-rayed Tut's tomb. He died from a mysterious illness. Sir Lee Stack was the Governor General of Sudan, and he was assassinated driving through Egypt's capital of Cairo. A.C. Mace was a member of Howard Carter's excavation team, and he died from arsenic poisoning. You also have the Honorable Mervyn Herbert, another half-brother of Lord Carnarvon, and he died from malarial pneumonia. And then you have the Honorable Richard Bethel, Howard Carter's personal secretary, who died from a suspected smothering in a Mayfair club. Richard Luttrell Pilkington Bethel was father of Richard Bethel, and he supposedly threw himself off of his 7th floor apartment. Now, the interesting thing with his death, according to a podcast I listened to, is that he was obsessed with the curse, and he got like a night's sleep about it, was really freaked out, and he, theories say, killed himself because he just couldn't take waiting around for death to find him. And then you have Howard Carter himself. He opened Tut's tomb, and he died from Hodgkin's disease, but that was at age 64. And then his brother William died the same year. But I mean, everybody dies. I think what's missing from this summary of deaths is sort of the when, because I know there were like a handful of folks that died within a year of the excavation, and then subsequent deaths followed. But yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think?
What year was the excavation?
1922.
Yeah. I think some of this can be chalked up to just living in 1922 and traveling around Africa and the Middle East.
Right.
But
Right.
there's an element of belief, right? Like the guy that killed himself made himself believe in the curse and made it so real that it became the self-fulfilling prophecy. So you could start to tap on like that same notion that belief is very powerful.
You could.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think that the only reason a curse would exist is would exist is if you believe in it.
And I'm trying to find what did the curse of the pharaoh say. So on King Tut's tomb, it said, "All people who enter this tomb, who will make evil against this tomb and destroy it, may the crocodile be against them in water and snakes against them on land." So that might just be like the curse that was on the outside. But you're right. Like, I think that when you have those words plus, you're doing something terrible, which is, think about how much work went into burying this person. And you're just going to dig them up and all that stuff. Like, there has to be a certain element of guilt at play too, where you're making it more true to maybe like satisfy whatever feeling you might be having about it.
Yeah. It's also possible that sealing the basically curse pact with a death would likely give the curse some actual weight behind it. So, like if the curse was being written right after the pharaoh was freshly entombed, then you would think that, that sort of death feeds the energy of the curse. So yeah, I mean, it's all possible.
Yeah, well, and then, when it starts to become more popularized, so for example, I think in the book Little Women, the author talks about an unknown volume lost in a pyramid, or the mummy's curse. So there had to have been an element where in 1922 you have these headlines about Egypt. Then, you got this juicy piece, which is mummies. And then curses, and it just snowballs from there, and it enters the popular mindset, and you have people who write books about it, and then pretty soon it's like, oh yeah, mummy's curse, totally, that makes total sense. And one thing that they don't talk about in the National Geographic article, but again, my podcast that I was listening to, she was saying that the uh, the Egyptian. So apparently, Carnarvon was supposed to split the spoils of the discovery, but because the tomb had never before been touched or opened since it was sealed, it became property exclusively of the government. So some people think that Carnarvon made up the curse so that he could, get some buzz about it and maybe make some money doing like interviews and stuff like that, or lectures and things. So, I mean, there could definitely be like a monetary element as well.
Oh, certainly. I mean, which I don't necessarily understand why, because it seems to me like, do you have to get people excited to buy gold from a mummy's tomb? Like it
Well,
would
yeah, it
seem
seems
to
like
me
a
that most
deterrent.
people would be clamoring, trying to buy whatever you're selling from the mummy tomb.
Well, and I think that's what happened was that the government took all that stuff, so he couldn't sell
Mm,
it. He had to find another way to make money. Um,
right.
so, I could, make sense that he would want to make a name for himself so that he could maybe, get backed to write a book or do another excavation and somehow recoup his costs. Now,
That
I
makes
do,
sense.
yeah, and I think it's interesting. There's a guy; he's an Egyptologist at the American University in Cairo and a National Geographic Society grantee. But he believes that the curse concept did exist in ancient Egypt and was part of a primitive security system. Oh, actually, it's a she. Sorry. She notes that some early non pyramid tomb walls in Giza and Saqqara were actually inscribed with curses meant to terrify those who would desecrate or rob the royal resting places. They tend to threaten desecrators with divine retribution by the council of the gods, or by a death by crocodiles or lions or scorpions or snakes. So just kind of throwing that in, like, yeah, those curses, maybe they're real, or maybe they're just like she said, a form of security, which is kind of funny. I
Well, and
like
I think it might be more of a form of security, because if you think about what they're doing is writing something over the tomb in their own language for an alleged grave robber that could come at any point in the future. It's like, so did they think that the Egyptian empire was going to exist forever and that everybody would be reading hieroglyphics? Or did they have no concept that eventually in the future there would be people that had no clue what their language was? It's very strange to me that you would even have these types of warnings over a grave, and then maybe it's literally just to keep other Egyptians at the time from robbing those graves.
Which is even weirder, because if most of the people getting this special treatment were rich anyway, you think they would hire guards to protect the tomb.
I don't think that you needed to, because most of them were probably sealed pretty well. But then, like if you know that the pharaoh just got buried with, 10,000 pounds of gold in his tomb, and
Right.
you're just a peasant and you guys don't have anything, you'd be probably trying to chip away at that tomb trying to get some of that gold.
I
Yeah.
mean,
It's like a cursed security sign that you put in front of your house, pretty much,
Right.
protecting all your stuff.
I need to do that for Halloween. Put like a little sign, be like, this house is protected by curses.
Yeah, be perfect.
Yeah. Well, and apparently, so, getting back into like what predated the Egyptians and what influenced them and things like that. So this one was talking about private tomb curses in the Old Kingdom era. So there was a tomb of, and Nick, you might need to help me out. Is that Ankh-Tifi?
I don't know.
Ankti. Oh yeah, you're not. Sorry,
Probably.
we're on a Google Doc.
Yeah.
Let's just say it's Ankh-Tifi, 9th to 10th dynasty, and on their tomb it says, "Any ruler who shall do evil or wickedness to this coffin, may a local deity not accept any goods he offers, and may his heir not inherit." And then you had the tomb of Kantika Ikheki, which is the 9th to 10th dynasty, and the inscription says, "As for all men who shall enter this my tomb impure, there will be judgment. An end shall be made for him. I shall seize his neck like a bird. I shall cast the fear of myself into him."
Hmm.
That's a good curse. I mean, I
Yeah.
shall cast the fear of myself into him. That's good. It's like a tattoo.
And that curse is a lot cheaper than guards.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Especially when you have a populace of people who likely are not privy to the mystery school secrets,
Indeed.
of the way the afterlife works, the way science works, the way the priest class works. So all they think is that, oh, their god emperor just died, and now they're entombing him in rock. And if you open that rock, then the gods are going to punish you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
I wouldn't open that rock. I'd be like, I think I'll find another way to get a meal or something. Well, that kind of just rounds out King Tut's curse. I know we'll probably loop back to it, but let's just go through a few more mummy stories. It is October anyway. So this next one, it's based in 1699. And Louis Penitcher wrote an account in which he recorded how a Polish traveler bought 2 mummies in Alexandria, and he embarked on a sea journey with the mummies in the cargo hold. But the traveler was alarmed by recurring visions of 2 specters, and the stormy seas did not abate until the mummies were thrown overboard. Mm. Any thoughts?
I mean, how
Jumps
long
over.
was the storm? Was it a reasonable length storm? Like, if it was storming for a week straight, then I would be like, okay, throw the mummies overboard. But like, if you got a storm that's like a day, and they're like, oh, it's a curse. No, you're just on the ocean.
Well, yeah, and I wonder because, like, remember back to the Familiars episode, there was that king and his wife was supposed to come over the seas to marry him, and she couldn't because there was a big storm. And then he went to go pick her up, and then he heard about witches, and they were like, "Oh, witches? What?" And then they were like, "Yeah, the witches can control the seas." And he's like, "What?" And then they tortured some poor woman into being like, "Yeah, that was me." And like, so it's just interesting to me that stormy seas tend to be the catalyst for a lot of like curse and witchery talk.
Well, so much of our economy was sea-based,
That's a good point.
Like,
Yeah.
everything we did as far as trade goes was on the ocean. So like really
Follow the money.
hindered on good seas.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and the ocean makes you feel tiny. It makes you. I can see where it makes you believe in God when you're staring at this wave that could flip your ship. You're like, I gotta throw these mummies. We're cursed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or just being like alone on a ship in the middle of nowhere with 2 mummies. I wouldn't feel comfortable. Not at all. And actually some people say, is that okay? Some people have said that the Titanic was actually carrying a mummy or 2, and that might be why it sunk. Yeah,
Uh-oh.
look into it. Yeah, I didn't get time to look into that story, but again, that's something that came across of my studies. So the next little mummy story is Zahi Hawass recalled that a young archaeologist excavating at Qom Abu Bio had to transport several artifacts from the Greco-Roman site. And his cousin died on that day, and his uncle died on its 1st anniversary, and on the 3rd anniversary, his aunt died. Years later, when he excavated the tombs of the builders of the pyramids of Giza, he encountered the curse, quote, "All people who enter this tomb who will make evil against this tomb and destroy it, may the crocodile be against them in water and snakes against them on land. May the hippopotamus be against them in water and the scorpion on land." It's not really a great story, but another story of somebody who dug something up and then people died. But it does seem a little bit far-fetched. Like your cousin, your aunt, and your uncle, maybe they just all lived in a house with mold or something. Like, it's got to be something else. And
Or
there were
there
theories.
was something incubating in those tombs for 1,000, 2,000 years.
I was going to say
some fungal spores.
that's a common one. But they actually disproved that more recently. They said that the air in there is probably much healthier than anything at the times they were pulled out, considering like plagues and stuff.
Well, too, I wonder if the curses, if they're real, they lose power in translation. Like that, like you were saying earlier, Nick, like it was written for Egyptians in Egyptian, and if you come across it in its native hieroglyph, then you are affected. And it's only through this distillation, through losing some sort of the meaning of the symbols and the words, that we don't have to handle or don't have to deal with it through like internet and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's possible. I mean, if words are sort of what we create spells on anyways, then you'd have to be deeply, in some sort of relationship with that linguistic, structure in order for it to mean anything to you. If I say abracadabra to somebody who doesn't know the colloquialism, it means nothing, right? So,
All right. Well, now let's take the lens and just widen it a dash, and talk about another mummy curse. This one takes place. It's a 5,300-year-old frozen corpse known as Otzi the Iceman. And I think there were 7 people to die within a year of this one coming out. So it was discovered in the Italian Alps near the Austrian border in 1991. Reports and pictures of the perfectly preserved Stone Age warrior sparked worldwide interest, but so did murmurs of a curse. And it was built around the theory that the Iceman was angry at being disturbed after 53 centuries. Just 53 centuries. 2020, it's not even the end of the year. That's 1 year, 53 centuries. This mummy was doing its thing. And the rumor of the curse began a year ago when the German tourist who discovered the mummy, Helmut Simon, at 67, fell to his death during a freak blizzard while hiking near the exact same spot where he saw Otzi through the ice. Within 1 hour of Simon's funeral, the head of the mountain rescue team that was assigned to find him, Dieter Warnecke, 45, died of a heart attack. And then in April, archaeologist Konrad Spindler, 55, who first inspected the prehistoric corpse, died of complications from multiple sclerosis. After that, the head of the forensics team, he died in a car crash on the way to give a lecture about the Iceman. The mountaineer who led Hen to the Iceman's body, Kurtz Fritz, died in an avalanche, the only one of his party to be hit. And the man who filmed Otzi's removal from his icy mountain grave, celebrated Austrian journalist Rainer Hoelsel, 47, died of a brain tumor. It's a little bit more convincing. I wonder if, 1991, we have a better way to track these things. I don't know.
I think I think I remember seeing a documentary about this.
Yeah.
At least something along those lines. But what I was going to ask is, I wonder what the climate was like when this Iceman was buried. Because I would doubt that there was actually ice.
What do you think it was?
I don't know. I mean, I just would think that if you're going to be burying somebody ceremoniously, would you do it in an icy place?
Well,
It seemed to work for Captain America.
That's true.
It's true.
I mean, unless there's some sort of significance to putting him on, putting your revered person on top of a mountain, but It just
Well,
seems odd for a place for a mummy.
yeah. Well, and it wasn't a mummy in the strictest sense. So, from what I remember for this one, there was like a wound or something, and then they were saying that like he might have been like murdered up
Just some
there and like left.
guy that died in ice.
And maybe. I mean, yeah, there's not a lot like about how he died, but what is interesting is that they were able to do DNA sampling on him, and they actually found 19 living male descendants in Austria who can trace their lineage back to this 53,000-year-old mummy.
5,300.
5,300.
Pretty gnarly.
5,300-year-old mummy. Yes. I can do math. Okay, well, I'm getting to the good stuff. So, moving forward to 2018, there is this article that comes out, and Nick, this is the one I messaged to you. It is an article about a mysterious 9-foot black sarcophagus in Egypt. It was opened despite warnings of an ancient curse. Now, again, my source on this one is The Sun, the tabloid, but there were a lot of other really good articles about it. So if you just look up 9-foot black sarcophagus, you're going to find some great stuff. Now, what's crazy about this one is that it's a total anomaly. So first, it's 9 feet long. It's just a really, really long sarcophagus. Also, the color is really different. Inside of it, they discovered 3 decomposed mummies submerged in rancid sewer water. And despite the concerns over an evil jinx, archaeologists broke open the sinister stone coffin and they live streamed the operation of that for the entire world to see. Now, I thought that was a really interesting point of distinction because a lot of times when you have these mummy curses, it applies to the people that were present at the time that it was opened. So I started to wonder, what if the people engaged in the live streaming desecration of this particular tomb somehow incurred some sort of curse that we might be seeing the effects of today? Kind of a leap, but I'm just saying, 2018 wasn't that long ago. A little bit more about this. So it's 9 feet long. It's a 2,000-year-old black granite coffin. It was the largest to ever have been discovered in the ancient Egyptian city of Alexandria. The black granite sarcophagus contained in the tomb dates back to the Ptolemaic period. Is that how you say that? Ptolemaic? It's like a PT. It's very weird. Which is sometimes somewhere between 323 and 30 BC. And it's the largest discovery of its kind in the area. Some people thought that it might have been the final resting place of Alexander the Great. Studies have since proven it's not. But none of the 3 mummies belong to any royal family. And it's unclear why it's a weird sarcophagus. Also inside, there was no silver, no gold metallic masks, no small statues, no amulets, no inscriptions were on the coffin. There's no royals. And they wondered why it was so big. Ancient Egyptians were typically much smaller than modern people and nowhere near 9 feet. In fact, the average height of an ancient Egyptian was just over 5 feet, while women were typically just shy of 5 foot. So among some of the other baffling things about this particular discovery is that floating inside this rancid water and these unmummified bodies, one of the skulls had a hole in it, so it suffered some sort of trauma. Also, they found that there were these like golden plates. There were like 3 golden plates floating in there, as well as a white head, like a cast of a head that was all white. Did the article have it in there, Nick? Did you see it? Must be a different one. But there's a really crazy picture. So just imagine like a granite head, like a cast, and then imagine it inside this tomb, which doesn't. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think? Do you think? I don't know.
Well, first of all, to me, it's like I don't understand how in the world this was created. by people who allegedly had rudimentary tool systems. This is a 9-foot long granite, black granite to boot,
To boot.
sarcophagus with beveled edges and some sort of like a, or like pentagonal shape. It's astounding to me that we would, and I understand maybe they just had a lot of time on their hands, and this is what you spent your entire life doing, was creating some box for your, just to put yourself when you died. But it just doesn't seem, it like doesn't make sense to me why this type of thing was happening all the time.
Well, and I found the right article. I just messaged it to you. It's from the Smithsonian. And this is really going to bake your noodle, because the photos in this one past the grizzled close-ups of skulls, which I was researching this at like 1 in the morning, and I got so freaked out I had to stop. This is partially why I didn't get a lot of facts into this one. But when you pull up this article, these little pictures, these 3 golden plates, one has a snake on them. I mean, it's pretty clearly a snake. The other one, I don't know what it is. So yeah, scroll down just a little more. Right there. And that's from the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities. And, it's just a little different. I don't
What are
know.
those things? I see like a snake and then
A snake, a pomegranate, and I don't know what the last one
A
is.
staff or something. They say,
The one right here.
let's see, they might
That's
represent the seed of an opium poppy inside a
Oh, yeah, that
shrine.
looks like a poppy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which may have associations with death, sleep, and rebirth. Another one shows an unhooded snake with its mouth open, which could be a symbol of the goddess Isis and represents rebirth. As a rule of thumb, it would seem that snake jewelry was primarily a female thing, but I think inside it was 1 woman, 2 men is what they determined. So they couldn't tell, what is it? They're not sure whether one could suggest that the presence of a snake suggests it was connected with the female occupant of the sarcophagus. But one thing I find really interesting, and then the 3rd gold panel either is a palm branch or a stalk of grain, both of which are related to fertility and rebirth. So I think that's really interesting. This is totally different from other coffins that we've seen. A big theme of it is about rebirth, and they're not mummified like they're prepared for the next life. It's almost as if, I don't know, they were meant to be reborn in 2018 and run amok until 2020. I'm just saying.
Or these people weren't wealthy enough to have the full experience, but not poor enough to be nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure. Go ahead, Mike.
I'm getting like Black Knight satellite vibes from the granite coffin.
Mhm.
And then I'm also wondering too, like the ancient Egyptians also had batteries. They had a bunch of technological marvels, and I wonder if they've ever experimented with trying to turn people into batteries. You would have to dissolve them in some liquid. I'm not too sure if the ceramic head would cause conductivity or anything like that to just break, just to not work. But it's strange to see them sitting in that fluid, and it makes me think that there's some sort of energy work being done.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, yeah. There's something there. And now, what's interesting too is that this particular granite sarcophagus weighs 30 tons.
Mm-hmm.
30 tons.
That's what I'm saying. I don't understand it at all. And this is the people who are the authorities on this will tell me that they use logs and pulleys and levers in order to build the pyramids. But I mean, like, you're talking about hundreds of tons per block just for the pyramids.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just one person's little sarcophagus, and it's 30 tons. Who lowered it in?
I know.
Who moved it?
I know. And again, I started out with the tabloid, but then backed it up with Smithsonian. Like all these findings, like you can find more information about them. And it's weird to me because in 2018, they say that they're going to analyze them and they're going to run them through, like, I don't know. They talk about, I don't know, like probably MRIs and DNA tests and all that stuff. But I tried to find follow-up studies about what those DNA tests revealed. It does not take 2 years to do a DNA test. There's no follow-up. Like, and to listeners out there, if you can find a follow-up, because again, I did get creeped out and I had to stop prematurely on my research, but like I definitely tried to find more recent coverage of the sarcophagus, to which I couldn't find anything.
Well,
The
you
only
missed
thing,
something.
well, yeah, I was gonna say the only thing that I was able to find beyond that was that there were people who started a petition that wanted to drink the mummy juice.
Ew, disgusting.
Yes.
Were they also Slipknot fans?
No.
Like, that sounds like a thing they would want to do.
But there's something really important here that we kind of glossed over, including one that survived brain surgery.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, there's
So
there's
one
that.
of these poor bastards got trepanned and lived to tell the tale.
Maybe.
Trepanned.
Trepanning was an ancient practice of letting the demons out of your head by puncturing your skull.
That would relieve swelling.
Uh-huh.
Or-
So you think that maybe they had demons and then they punctured the skull and then they buried them and then we have this liquidy black sarcophagus that just
No,
got
I think
unearthed and people
trepanning
want to
was
drink it?
no, I think trepanning was more prehistoric than ancient Egypt. I don't know why they were performing brain surgeries in ancient Egypt, but trepanning was something we were doing when we were, still cave people, basically.
Boy. Yeah. Well, and it's weird if you think that like the brain isn't where your intelligence is sourced and you just chuck it. Why would you like? Oh, maybe they thought let's just remove the brain because you don't need. I don't know. I really don't know.
the brain's not that important, and I guess your curiosity to operate on it is also increased. Right? Like it just becomes like an appendix or something you
Right.
can play with in surgery.
Right. And I'm disappointed because I can't find the head anywhere. But like I said, there was a just like a bust of someone's head floating in there, and it was made out of white granite, which I think is also really weird.
Well, granite too is also radioactive, which is strange. In high quantities, granite becomes radioactive.
Oh,
So
weird.
they say, like, what's the New York station? Grand Central Station.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It has a radioactive hum to it because of all the granite in the station.
Remember hearing that. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, again, people look into it a little bit more. It's very fascinating to me. Well, okay. So next up, I wanted to talk about another more recent mummy discovery. And I'm sure you've heard about it. This was in 2020, and a total of 27 sarcophagi that were buried more than 2,500 years ago were found in ancient Egyptian necropolis. Okay. By archaeologists in an ancient Egyptian necropolis. And I remember seeing this article earlier this year, and I thought, 2020 is already so crazy. We have like locusts taking over a lot of parts of sub-Saharan Africa, and you do see a plague traveling the world, and it just made me wonder again about that live streamed mummy opening, and then now we have it here again, and people are like, maybe you shouldn't open it, but they're doing it. And I guess 13 coffins were opened, and then they had another 14 that they found, but so far it's one of the largest discoveries of its kind. And a lot of the wooden coffins were really well preserved with smaller artifacts, and they had a lot of like colorful painting on them. So I don't know. I mean, what do you think? Given what we've, talked about so far, do you think it's wise to open those coffins this year? Maybe just not televise it, or is it all just a bunch of hooey?
I say go for it. Have fun. We might as well.
Have
There's
fun.
only a couple more months to this year, so we make sure that we go out with a bang.
There it is. Okay.
If like a lot of these curses have this thing of like if you do evil or if you bring evil. So I wonder if there's a group
Or
of
you're
people
not
that
worthy.
yeah, like if there's a group of people that can open up these sarcophaguses and not have some horrible thing happen to them. Uh,
Right.
and I
And I
wonder
thought,
too if we can. Sorry, go
go
for
ahead,
it.
go ahead.
Like if we could quantify evil through live streams, that'd be kind of cool. I think-
Well, getting back to that app where you can like generate things from the ether and the app will tell you where to go. It's like that nautical app or
Randonautica.
Mhm.
Randonautica. Yeah. Nick and I downloaded it for like a day and then we were too scared to try it out, so we deleted it. But I mean, we could try it. But again, I don't know exactly how that algorithm is supposed to work and if that's something that's like,
Mila, would you download a Ouija board?
oh, hell no. And that's
Then
another
why'd you
article.
download a Ouija board?
Well, that's like an exhibit we could do because I think somebody made like the world's largest Ouija board this year as well. I mean, like, how big does a Ouija board have to be? What are you trying to conjure up? It's not good stuff, that's for sure.
Good thing.
Um, but I thought it was funny what you said about like, if you're kind of like testing the viewer in a way, because they were saying that like curses can't differentiate between an archaeologist and a thief. So if you buy into that, it's like, well, but what standards are we looking at here? Because an archaeologist would be just a thief to a mummy.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think the standard basically is don't touch me, leave me in my place, and don't take any of my stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean?
So
Right.
they're like old libertarians, like
Yeah, I
really, really old. libertarians.
Old Ron
If you
Swanson.
take my stuff,
Yeah.
I'll curse you.
That's why they kept it with them. That's why they buried it with them. They don't want to give it to the government.
There it is. There it is.
It's an after death tax write off.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a really interesting. Yeah, you can't just like make more money hoarding it. Well, and money is exactly right because apparently in recent years, Egypt's been ramping up its promotion of archaeological findings, in a hope to revive a failing tourist industry. Maybe not failing, but it was taking a dip. So they started promoting more and more of these finds. But then I went to like the Ministry of Egyptian. It's like a formal term, and I tried to just corroborate and see what they said, but a lot of the text didn't translate well, so can't give you that perspective.
And they could drum up their business if they just accept that the Sphinx is older than the pyramids.
Right.
They won't do it.
Isn't that a can of worms?
Yeah, they're just, I guess, I
So
don't
we
know.
gotta start digging under paws of the Sphinx and all
No,
that
it's
stuff.
it's not
True.
necessarily. It's just that they refuse to because it would, if they found out that the Sphinx was older, then it would kind of blow apart the narrative. And there's a lot of money in being an Egyptologist. You know,
Wait, what narrative? Maybe we
the
should.
narrative that the Egyptian Empire was what created the Sphinx, and that wasn't just inherited by them from an older society. As the water erosion at the base of the Sphinx would suggest that it's been around during heavy rainfall in the Nile Valley, and that didn't happen. The last time that happened was over 10,000 years ago, which would date the Sphinx back before 10,000 years, which is 7 or 8,000 years longer or older than Egyptologists want to claim it is.
Yeah, I mean, when you get into all the like dating of stuff, that's really cool. Like I remember when I first learned about like dendrochronology, and so you could, for example, see the wood used in certain tombs, and you could look at like the distribution of the rings to assess what the climate was like. And then you can compare that to other woods that you found in similar areas, and start to kind of piece together like which existed around the same times, or petrified wood. You can look at it that way too.
And these sneaky bastards, they made their tombs out of something you can't carbon date.
Sneaky bastards.
Basically as old as the earth itself, so you can't ever know how old they are.
Yep.
Wise, very wise.
Mm-hmm.
Almost too wise. Well, and so I wanted to round this discussion out too, just by taking a little short dive into the Book of the Dead. I know this could probably be a whole episode, But the Book of the Dead is a series of written spells that the ancient Egyptians believed helped them in the afterlife. It isn't just one giant book, but more of a bunch of individual chapters. And the spells from the Book of the Dead were written on papyrus sheets or on the walls of the actual tomb. Scribes used hieroglyphics to write down the spells, and they also illustrated the stories of the Book of the Dead with colorful pictures. Now, not every Book of the Dead was the same. The wealthy could afford to hire a scribe to make a special book for them with specific spells that they thought they would need in the afterlife. And poorer people could buy pre-written versions where the scribe would enter their name into the blanks. And either way, it was a big expense to have a Book of the Dead, and not everyone could afford one. So just right there, I didn't know that. I thought the Book of the Dead was like one ancient Bible-like text that was recently discovered, and we were like, oh my God, and it's like all creepy and stuff. But I didn't know it's kind of more of like something you just provide for one specific person and their passing.
It's almost like ancient Egypt had a death industrial complex. You know what I mean?
Everybody's gonna
Where it's
die.
like, buy your Book of the Dead, everyone. Make sure you have the Book of the Dead. Hey, Pharaoh, you want to make sure you have the biggest tomb, right? Yeah, everybody wants to have the biggest tomb when they die. Let's build these big pyramids. You know, like it's almost like they had these grifter priests that were like, yeah, and you got to make sure that your capstone is pure gold. Everybody's going to be so jealous of you in the afterlife. Like, it's so weird.
June, there's a lot of psychedelics being used in ancient Egypt. So now you have this grifter selling you a giant tomb while you're on psychedelics.
Yeah, right.
Oh, geez.
You're like, yeah, no, I'll buy it. Yeah, no, you're right.
Well, yeah, and it's just a little interesting to me, because you're right, Nick. It kind of just reminds me of the Familiars episode, and you have this guy doing witch hunting, and it gets crazier and crazier. He's just finding more witches, and he's making more books. But the reality is he was making money off of it. Not just him, but like the guys that imprisoned the witches, the guys that murdered the witches, the guys that built the apparatuses to torture the witches, the printing presses that printed the books about witches. And so only until it became a point where like the people that lived in the city were getting taxed so much money for this witch hunt that was going on that the people were like, well, okay, I need to eat, so maybe we should let this witch off. And and then you start to see it dive down. So there could be something of that happening where you saw this peak in mummification and death rites, and then it starts to kind of wane as people can't afford it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, of course, and then obviously preying upon the nobility, the people who could afford it, the people who could mummify 50 cats in their tomb,
Right.
Yeah, it's 5 gold pieces per cat, sir, and you're gonna make sure you want at least 50 cats because everybody else has 50 cats, and you should really have 54. So you gotta at least have 4 more than most people.
Oh my gosh, Nick, I could totally see you like
It's like a
hanging out
Monty
outside.
Python.
It is. Well, it's just I could see you outside of a mortuary, like, hey, did you get your cats? It's just terrible. Oh my god.
Cats here, 10 pieces, 10 pieces
It's
for one.
terrible. To be clear, we're not doing that. We love cats. We love all animals.
They were doing that.
Well, and it was interesting. Like some of the chapters of the Book of the Dead, they talked about like certain chapters that were used during the funeral procession. Certain chapters were a formula to prevent the person from having to work in the next life. They were spells that prevented the heart of a man from being taken from him in the afterlife. There were spells to fight against snakes. So that was kind of interesting. And then just some other interesting Book of the Dead facts. The name for the Book of the Dead is technically translated as the spells of coming forth by day, which I thought was interesting. The text was usually written in black ink with the titles written in red, and it describes creatures guarding the underworld with scary names like He Who Lives on Snakes and He Who Dances in Blood. And one of the most famous examples of the Book of the Dead is the Papyrus of Ani, which you can see in the British Museum in London.
Cool.
The spells of coming forth by day.
Yeah.
It's like the Book of the Dead was like a menu.
And then you.
Playbook.
You could like piece together.
So true.
Like we're selling at Roth IRAs now. They were selling Book of the Deads back then. You know?
Yeah.
But too, like the Egyptians, they were obsessed with death, and obviously they didn't think it was the end, that there's a afterlife, and they moved on. So it does make sense why markets would arise around it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and to that comes my last question, since we got to the other two final thoughts earlier in the podcast. But does a mummy and our ideas about mummies in the today reflect our views on death? To what extent does this permanent statement appeal to impermanence?
Right. So I think the relationship now with mummies has been kind of Hollywooded away. Like entertainment kind of like dominated what it may actually be. But I think in reality, it gives us a chance to reflect on our own relationships with death as a culture and as individuals, and how we want to finally die, I guess, like where we want to end up being, regardless of afterlife or things like that. Because these are obviously human bodies that are amazing, like are well preserved can be. Is that something we want to do? Is that something we don't want to do? It forces the reflection, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think it's similar to what we were talking about like wanting to reabsorb into the earth or wanting to block that and have like a tomb.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nick, any thoughts about that? About just kind of
Yeah, it strikes me as something notable to mention, that we kind of like throughout our society and up until this, even right now, we've like subconsciously almost adopted a lot of magical ritualism without really knowing the magic behind it anymore. So I'm thinking about like the concept of embalming and preserving a body for the afterlife. We still do that today. I mean, open caskets are a thing, and people get embalmed and all of that kind of stuff. But I think that like, so there are practices that we kind of continue on almost without even really considering the magical elements in which they were birthed, and I find that really interesting. And so I think what's cool about the mummy is that it's both science and magic at the same time, and you can kind of integrate both in a really interesting way. And it's something that we kind of like, it started off as magic and then it became science, and we've kind of forgotten about the magic origin of it. And I wonder if that leaves us wanting in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I really like that, because you're right. Like, the rituals around mummies and tombs and all of 40 days of preparation. I think it's interesting, that kind of level of care is part of why.
Or two.
I know. I was thinking about that too, like 40 days, 40 nights.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of like symbology, and it's like, did we just adopt those terms and numbers and lengths of time because that's what we observed, or is that something that we always did for a reason? But I do think that like all that level of care is part of why we take note today. There is a specialness around it, and I like that you kind of say it does tie in science and archaeology and history and magic, and it's totally fascinating. I mean, this could have easily been like a 30-page paper, and I would have barely scratched the surface, because there's just so many directions that you can take it.
Mm-hmm. Like a maze in a pyramid?
Totes. I think that's it. So thanks for joining me on this little journey through mummiedom. I hope it was interesting, and I think Nick, if you wanted to do just some end of show wrap up.
Certainly. Thank you, Ayla. That was an incredible conversation and a wonderful addition to our Spooktacular Spooktober series. We will be coming back with another spooky edition in the coming weeks. But thank you, Ayla, for that. That was wonderful.
Yay.
And thank you guys for listening. We have one comment here that I wanted to show here from Christopher Mansuri, who says that logs and pulleys would crush and would never work for building the pyramids. Amen. I totally agree with you. And
It's suspicious.
at some point, I think we can get into the Great Pyramids of Giza and just talk about the logistics of it all and how bizarre it would seem that, you know, using logs and lever systems is how they moved, you know, hundreds of tons of quarried stone. But, you know, whatever. Anyways. We hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. We definitely, I know I certainly did. And please feel free to leave us comments, leave us feedback, what you think, what you like, what you don't like, any ideas you might have for us in the future on topics that you'd like to hear us talk about. Please let us know. Consider giving us a follow on YouTube and on Facebook and on Instagram. That's all at Exofathom. And also consider visiting thinkering.space to catch the network of podcasts that we are a part of. That would be the Thinkering Report, If Numbers Could Talk, and The Plank with Joe. Until next time, Cognonauts, you stay out there, and we will catch you on the next Exofathom. Good night.
Peace.
Later.